on with us and gotten disconnected. Sorry about that. We were attempting to record the webinar, and sometimes technology is the way that technology is, and it doesn't always work exactly as you want to go. But if you're just joining us, then welcome. And we're going to get started here in just a minute. Just double checking a few things technically here and making sure we're all set. But one of the exciting things about doing this webinar is it's a great way, it's a very simple and easy way to educate people in the comforts of their own home about the fair tax. And as I was mentioned just a few minutes ago, I see a lot of new faces on tonight that I haven't seen before. So we welcome you, and we welcome your questions. I'll get to that in just a second. And then I also want to welcome those of you who've been on many, many times before. A lot of familiar faces here, and I thank you for your continued support. So with that, we're going to get started here momentarily, and I want to point everyone's attention to their control panel. On your control panel at the bottom, there's a place where you can type in and ask a question, and we invite you to do that as often as you like, anytime a question pops up for you, because part of tonight is not just talking at you, it's making sure that you walk away with a really good understanding of what the fair tax is and how it benefits you, and generally, at least generally speaking, how it works. And I say general, we're going to give you an overview of what the fair tax is. We're also going to do a quick overview of our special topic tonight, the prebate, and go into a little bit greater detail on that. But at the end of the day, we want you to walk out of here with an understanding of how the fair tax works, why it's best for our country, and what's in it for you. And so as we proceed along here and something pops up for you, please type in your question, and we'll go ahead and get that answered. So the way this works is I'm going to be giving about a 20-minute overview of the fair tax and its main merits, and then we'll pause for questions. We'll do a very quick special topic tonight, which is a little bit more in-depth information on the prebate, although it's a very simple component, so it's not going to take us long. And then we'll finish up with any additional questions that you may have. So again, if you've just joined us, and there's a lot of people joining us still from all over the country, welcome. My name is Mark Maneri. I'm the host of the National Fair Tax Webinar, which is the fourth Thursday of every single month. And we're now into our fourth year, and we've had hundreds and thousands of supporters from all 50 states tune in. So we're happy to have you here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to respect everyone's time, and I'll just ask my colleague Larry, if he hasn't pressed record, to please do so. And I also want to let everyone know I'm also joined by my great colleague Carrie Bowers tonight, who is such a great wealth of information, and he'll be on the line tonight helping me answer the questions that you all have, so you walk away with your questions answered. So let's go ahead and get rolling here. So, you know, one of the things that I like to say about the fair tax, it is simple, it is fair, and it is transparent. And let's just start out with simple here for a second. And, you know, I always say that what makes America great is that we evolve in so many areas. And if we look back in our history, you know, certainly you can say that, and we've been a leader in so many different realms. But certainly when it comes to tax legislation, we've got a long way to go. And I don't think there's anybody on this line, I don't think there's anybody paying attention civically or politically, for that matter, in our country that wouldn't agree we need tax reform. In fact, it's a pretty hot topic right now. So, but what this graphic is, as you can see, is the number of pages in our tax code. And now into 2013, we're well over 75,000 pages in our aggregate tax code with all the changes and updates and everything else. It is absolutely impossible for any single person to understand all the nuances of this tax code and get it right. In fact, there's a study done where the same tax return was given to dozens of different tax preparers, and every single one of those individuals came back with a different number. So it's extremely convoluted, and as we get into this, you'll see, unfortunately, why it's convoluted. Ultimately, it's self-serving for the U.S. Political contingency. They get to hide behind that, and that's what eliminates transparency in our current tax code. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But the fair tax is legislation that exists right now in the House and in the Senate, and it is 131 pages double-spaced. So compare 131 pages versus 75,000, and you've got a very, very simple tax code. And the fair tax is not tax reform, it's tax replacement. It's a new way to fund our federal government and collect revenue for the federal government that, again, is simple, it's fair, it's transparent, and in my opinion, it is the right tax legislation that moves our country forward economically, as well as all the businesses and individuals. So it really supports us financially and economically in a way that is totally different from our current tax system now, which really penalizes us for growth, right? The more money we make, the more we grow, the more we make, whether it's money on our money in terms of capital gains or it's more income, we get penalized for that. And we're not and our tax code doesn't inspire the kind of behavior that we want. We want to create a tax code that inspires greater growth. And that's exactly what the fair tax does, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So, what is it? Fair tax, like I said, is a brand new way to fund our federal government, and what it will do simply is eliminate all the mandatory taxes you see up here on the screen. And obviously, most prominent is the first check mark. Income taxes go away, right? Income taxes go away, Medicare, Social Security, FICA, all those taxes go away, and we will fund our federal government with basically a national retail sales tax, all right? And what is that amount? It's going to be 23 cents out of every dollar spent on new goods and services. And you can see those two important check marks at the bottom. There's no taxes on business-to-business production costs and no tax on used goods. And what that does, in a sense, is it gives us a choice, right? So now, if we choose to purchase a used car or a home that's been lived in before, or used clothing, or used goods, for example, on Craigslist, we're not going to pay taxes on those things. So we actually have a choice, and that's a very, very interesting proposition, right? So the other cool thing about the fair tax is it is extremely progressive, because if you compare lower income class Americans to wealthy Americans, obviously wealthy Americans are spending a lot more of their disposable income. They're spending a lot more money, period, and as they spend more, they get taxed more, right? But we're taxing on consumption as opposed to income, and so not only is that fair, but we're not stifling economic growth and business growth, right? So more on that in a bit. All right. So one of the examples I like to use in talking about the fair tax in terms of how it works is looking at it from the perspective of a home construction company. So let's say you've got a home builder, and they're a business, and they go out and build homes, right? So everything that they need to build a home is a business transaction, right? It's a business cost to them. So when they buy the land, when they buy bricks, when they buy copper wiring, and the hundreds, if not thousands, of things that go into building a home, all those are business-to-business transactions, and the fair tax is not factored in. Now, when that home gets built and they go to sell it for the very first time to a consumer who wants to buy that brand new good, the consumer will ultimately end up paying the fair tax on that. Fair tax gets levied that one time. So for simplicity purposes, if the builder prices that home at $100,000, $23,000 23% of that is fair tax, and that's embedded inside the cost of that home to the consumer. So that's another important point. The fair tax is inclusive. So what that means is when you go to buy a new home for 100 grand, or even simpler, a brand new pair of designer jeans for 100 bucks, when you get to the cash register, you don't pay that dollar amount times 23% added on. No, the 23% fair tax is inclusive. It's embedded inside, and that's what and it's included. So the $100 price tag that you see on those designer jeans, you pay that 100 bucks, right? And then you'll get a receipt that says $23 of that $100 that you spent went to the federal government in the form of retail sales tax, right? So back to the home builder example, when that new home gets built, 100 grand, builder comes into the builder's coffers. They're responsible for setting aside $23,000 of it, and every month they'll pass that on to their state sales tax bureau, right? And so it's collected from the businesses. And you and I, as citizens of this country, April 15th just becomes another spring day, and we don't have to worry about taxes, right? It's just for businesses to take care of, and it's a very simple form to fill out, one-page form. Now, when that consumer who buys that brand new home from the home builder, when they go and decide it's time to move on and they sell that home, it's considered a used good. All right, so the next consumer who purchases that home again, the fair tax is not levied, and that transaction does not bear the burden of the fair tax. So that's just a good example, a very simple example to suggest how the fair tax gets levied in our system. Now, there's something that's really, really important to understand, and there's been a lot of discussion about this recently. We're going to dig in a little bit deeper here than I normally do because it's really important to understand. And a part of that is our current pricing system now, and then also what's going to happen to prices once the fair tax gets implemented. So for now, really, in effect, what's happening, what I like to say is, in effect, we're obviously paying an income tax right now, but to a degree, you could suggest that we're also paying a sales tax nationally. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, every time that we go and purchase something at a store, we're ultimately paying the business income taxes of that business, right? Because every business takes their business income taxes plus their FICA taxes, their 7.65% they're responsible for paying, as well as their compliance costs to conform to the federal income tax code and pay their business income taxes. Those are line item expenses that they factor in when they talk about profit margin, right? So let's go back to that designer jean example, right? So let's say the business who manufactures and sells designer jeans, if they want to have a profit margin of, let's say, 20%, and they're selling their jeans at $100, that means all of the costs that go into their business represent about $80 on a per unit basis. Well, inside of that $80, inside of that cost structure, is included proportionately on a per unit basis their business income taxes, their FICA taxes that they have to pay on behalf of every employee, as well as all the costs associated with complying to the federal income tax code, which is going to be paying accountants and probably having people on staff that can help them make decisions when it comes to new products and pricing and factoring in taxes, corporate income taxes, right? So all those things gets factored in, and in effect, when they set their price of $100, guess what? They're passing off their costs on to us. So we call that the embedded tax, and it's different as a percentage basis. It's different for every industry, right? It's as little as perhaps 10 or 11 or 12% for some industries, and it's a lot higher, maybe 28, 29, 30% for other industries. On average, it's about 22% of all the costs that go into the cost of producing a good for businesses, right? So that's the embedded tax is roughly 22%, right? So It's important to understand that right now, and then when the fair tax gets passed, those embedded costs come out for businesses. So let's talk about that a little bit further. So how will the fair tax affect prices once it gets implemented? Well, if you look at this, the hard cost savings for businesses that we absolutely know concrete are stated right here on the screen. So corporate income taxes go away. All right? That comes out of their cost structure. Their share of FICA, Social Security and Medicare at 7.65%. That goes away. That comes out of their cost structure. Their compliance costs go away because, again, there's no more business income taxes. They're not going to have those compliance costs. So that comes out. So the question is, what is going to happen to prices? Are prices going to go up by 23%? Probably not. The straight answer is that we don't know what's going to happen to prices, but what we do know is that these three components are going to come out, and the fair tax that is going to be required for businesses to add in 23% is going to go in. So what we used to say is that the embedded cost, what you saw on the last screen, of on average 22% goes out, the fair tax of 23% comes in, and it's a wash, and prices aren't going to change. Well, it's not that simple, and truthfully, that's a fallacy. What we expect to happen is that depending on the industry and the business, prices will increase somewhere between perhaps 5 and 20%. But we just don't know. What we do know also is that the average income for Americans is going to increase by 29%, right? Because they get to take home 100% of their paycheck, and they're not paying their 7.65% of employee taxes, Social Security and Medicare taxes that gets withheld from their paycheck. They take home all of that, and there's no more withholdings, right? So their disposable income is going to dramatically increase. So even if, as prices are going to certainly rise a bit, the consumer is going to be better off, right? Their disposable income, even after an increase in prices, is still going to outweigh the increase in prices that we may see. Okay? So at the end of the day, we come out ahead financially as individuals, and we don't have to deal with taxes anymore. So it's a lot more simple. So it's really, this is a tricky point, and in the last weeks we've talked a lot about this, and we say, how do we explain this? And the truth is that we don't know how much prices are going to go up. They are going to go up, but at the end of the day, Americans are going to be better off because the average income is going to go up by at least 29%, and we're going to have more disposable income than ever before. So more on that in just a bit. Now, let's talk about fairness here. So the prebate, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the special topic when we're done here and answering some questions. So I'll go through this quickly, but the prebate assures that no one pays federal tax up to the poverty level. And simply what the prebate does is it untaxes all Americans, not just lower income class Americans, but all Americans, on the money they spend up to the poverty level limit. So what you're seeing is a prebate schedule here, and the annual consumption allowance, if you look at that column, was determined by the Department of Health and Human Services independently inside the federal government. All right, this is not, the annual consumption allowance is not something that was created by the legislators, or excuse me, the preparers of the fair tax legislation. So what we're saying here is that, let's just say let's look at one example to explain this very simply. If you look on the right-hand side, a married family with, let's say, 2 kids, so a family size of 4, it is suggested by the Department of Health and Human Services that if that family spends $29,420, that is poverty level limit spending over the course of an entire year. Now, what does that mean? That means that everything that they spend above that now goes above poverty level limit spending and is spending well beyond poverty level limits. So if you take 23% of $29,420, you get an annual prebate of $6,767. You divide that number by 12 months in a year, and $564 is going to be direct deposited into that family's bank account at the beginning of the month, reimbursing them in advance for the poverty level spending that they spend for that month. And so if you look at poverty level spending, what is that spent on? Food, shelter, clothing, transportation, medical supplies. Okay? So the prebate assures that no one pays federal taxes up to the poverty level limit spending on a per household basis. And what it does is it simply untaxes you. Now, why don't we just exempt basic necessities like food, housing, and clothing? Well, there's a very good reason for that, and I'll save that for the special topic when we get into the special topic after we do our first round of questions. Okay, so at the end of the day, why is the prebate written in? It's about fairness, right? It's about untaxing not only lower income class Americans, but all Americans on the spending that they do on a monthly and annual basis just to eke a living out. All right, so what are the benefits of the fair tax? How does it boost business and trade? All right, so look at that first bullet point. It's estimated that $30 trillion in global personal and corporate wealth are parked in offshore banking centers. Well, that money is going to be attracted into the United States. Why? Because the United States is going to have, look at bullet point number 2, the lowest corporate income tax structure in the world, effectively zero, right? So what you've got is now a place where businesses want to relocate to because of the lowest corporate income tax structure in the world. So what is that going to mean? Well, they're going to relocate here. They're going to build new buildings, which is going to be a huge, robust impact on our economy. They're going to hire people. So the jobless rate is going to dramatically decrease. And as more companies relocate here, as more businesses expand and hire more people, the unemployment rate goes down, disposable income for more Americans goes up, and what are Americans going to do with their money? They're going to spend it. And as they spend, businesses are going to thrive, and as they thrive, they're going to expand, and as they expand, there's going to be more jobs. And you've got this incredible, robust flywheel that starts to spin very, very fast and is going to rocket this economy forward unlike anything we've ever seen before. Right? It's estimated that in the first year, perhaps $1 trillion is going to be attracted organically back into the United States because of the fair tax and eliminating corporate income taxes and capital gains taxes. So as that happens, we're going to see a massive, massive positive impact on our economy. Now here's another point to think about. You think about the foreclosure rate that is finally starting to slow, but is still happening right now. And I remember hearing an economist talk about on the news that they estimated the average American, if they had an additional $500 to $700 a month in their income, they'd be able to save their home. And you think about what that would have done if we would have been able to save all those foreclosures that happen in this country just by implementing the fair tax, people taking home their full paycheck and having more disposable income than they've ever had before, right? So that's just one example of how the fair tax could have benefited this country. And then you look at the third bullet point, the underground economy is estimated at now $2 trillion, and everyone that's not paying taxes right now, you know, people who are avoiding taxes illegally, drug dealers, illegal immigrants, all these people, when they go and spend money at the grocery store, at the mall, on new homes, new cars, anything like that, they're going to pay their fair share, right? And that's a brand new revenue stream that's going to come in to the U.S. government, which, by the way, the fair tax rate at 23% is going to be revenue neutral in its first year. And what that means is it's going to collect the exact same amount of money that Congress collects right now and uses to fund the federal government with. And then as the economy grows, they're going to collect more money. So everybody benefits. Businesses benefit. It's easier on them, and it releases them the burden of Social Security and Medicare taxes, as well as corporate income taxes. The burden of income taxes is lifted from all American households, the federal government benefits when the economy grows at a much more rapid pace than is happening right now. So everybody wins when it comes to the fair tax. All right, so how does this whole thing work? How does it get collected? Well, 45 states currently collect a state sales tax, so the infrastructure is already in place. There will be a state sales tax bureau put in place. They'll be responsible from collecting, look at the second bullet point, from approximately 18 million businesses as opposed to approximately 120 million households. So right off the bat, we get 80% more efficient. There's only one state sales tax form to fill out for businesses. It's simple, right? Your revenues were X, multiply X times 23%, and you take that and you send it up to your state sales tax bureau. And then the states and their bureaus are incentivized by 0.25% of the money that they collect, and that money will be used to ensure and enforce that the fair tax gets collected properly. So it's very, very simple process. Obviously there'll be a bit of a learning curve there, but we're talking about the biggest tax replacement in history. So there's going to be a little bit of learning there, but the good news is that the infrastructure is already in place. All right. So if you look at this, you would say, wow, this benefits everyone. Why wouldn't everybody be for this? So that's a great question. The people that aren't for it are the people whose income and in a sense their jobs or power or influence are affected by the fair tax. Because what we've already said is that the fair tax benefits individuals, both wealthy individuals and lower income class individuals. It benefits businesses. It benefits our economy. And the people on the screen here are the people whose income and influence is affected. So if you think about it, 50% of lobbyists are tax lobbyists. Well, the moment the fair tax gets implemented, those tax lobbyists aren't going to be needed anymore. So they feel threatened, and they secretly suggest to politicians that it's risky and that it's something that they shouldn't support. And of course, politicians, how are they affected? Well, we were talking about this earlier, and this is where I said I would dive a little bit deeper into it. Politicians get to hide behind the 75,000 pages in our tax code right now. What do I mean by that? Well, anytime they suggest legislation, that legislation needs to get paid for. Well, how does it get paid for? Well, they simply will amend one of the pages in the 75,000 page tax code, and we as American citizens never know about that. So it's very clouded or cloudy. There's no transparency in our tax code right now, and the fair tax would eliminate that. And so now when a politician wants to set forth legislation, they have to figure out a much more transparent way to pay for their pet projects, and they don't like that, right? And if you think about it, all the wealthy corporations that contribute to political re-election campaigns, they'd have to rethink that, because a lot of what that money's going towards is to affect tax legislation, corporate tax legislation. There's an amazing study done. For every dollar spent, for every dollar a wealthy corporation spent on tax lobbyists, to affect the corporate income tax code in their favor, it returned $6. Well, all of a sudden, when corporate income taxes go away, everybody, they're not going to have a need to pay lobbyists anymore to affect their corporate income tax structure because it's going to go away. So things are going to dramatically change, and the power is going to shift away from lobbyists and politicians back to the people, and of course the politicians certainly don't like that. And of course IRS workers don't like perhaps the fair tax because the IRS is suggested will be defunded over a 3-year period. So these are the people who aren't in favor of the fair tax, and it's all for self-interest. And so you got to think about that when it comes to election time. All right, so we've talked about the fair tax and its main merits, and we've talked about who wouldn't be for it. And at the end of the day, one of the things what we like to say is you got to continue to get educated. And there was 2 great books written about the fair tax, co-authored by Neil Bortz and John Linder, who is the original co-sponsor of the fair tax inside Congress. And we recommend that you continue to read these books and get educated. So what we want to do right now is we want to take some questions, and there's been a number of questions written in here. And so we're going to go ahead and pause here, and we are going to answer your questions, and then we will do your special topic tonight, which is a little bit more in-depth on the fair tax prebate, and then we will get back to answering your questions. All right, so this question comes in from Chad, and what I'm going to do here is I am going to unmute my colleague here, Kerry Bowers, who is a wealth of information. He's going to help us out here. Okay, so the first question comes in from Chad, who says, how will the fair tax affect online retailers like Amazon? Great question, Chad. Kerry, you want to tackle that one?
Sure. Can you hear me okay, Mark?
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay. The fair tax is considered to be what we call a destination tax. In other words, wherever the product or service is being consumed is generally where the tax liability is imposed. In the case of an online retailer, and the gentleman asking the question now maybe sees what's going on now in Congress to try to get such a law enacted. But under the fair tax, what will happen is that in the case of internet sales or any other type of mail order sale for whatever the case may be, if you're in one state and you sell an item to an individual in another state where it's going to be consumed, the person selling that item will be responsible for collecting the tax on the item they sell into another state. That will be reported to their individual state authority, and it will be allocated for purposes of what state was collecting what taxes then by the federal government through the Sales Tax Bureau at the federal level. So bottom line is internet sales will be taxed, and that's a philosophy I agree with. I agree with it now. And what they're trying to do with the income tax structure under the existing tax code. And the reason for that is that it's doing great damage in states to what we call the brick and mortar companies that are retailers that are providing products that are being outsold in many cases by online sales. It also robs the state of very important revenues that they need in order to be able to run their states effectively. So yes, under the fair tax, states selling from, or a retailer selling from one state into another state will be required to collect taxes on that sale.
Thanks, Kerry. So here's a follow-up question to that that was written in, similar. So what about businesses that are not American businesses that sell, whether it's through online sales or whether they're selling, direct to the consumer, or they even have a physical address? But what if they're not an American business? How is that?
Yeah. If they're an American business, if they're a foreign business operating in the United States and they're making sales of products and services, it's written into H.R. 25 that at any stage in the process of that money transfer from the person that's being purchased by and the person receiving the money as a result of the sale has a responsibility to pay the federal government the appropriate sales tax. That will have to be collected. And they give the whole string, if you will, of the possible hands in which that money may change before it ever leaves the country, that any one of those hands that comes into contact with that money as a result of a sale here in this country has an obligation and a duty to collect that. People that are failing to do that, there is going to be a 1-800 number per se that is set up to report those violations that will then have the federal government react accordingly on them. If you're purchasing an item from outside the country and it's being brought into the country, you would have the situation of, one, you may have duties, you may have imposts, you may have other tariffs that could be applied to that. The bottom line is that you're going to be limited, as you would have today, on the amount of foreign goods that you can bring in for personal consumption is $400. You'll have that same limitation. It's written into the bill. You bring it into the country. You try to get it through customs, whether mailed in or let's say that you bring it in personally, you're going to end up paying a tax on that particular item.
Thank you, Kerry. This question comes in from John. What is the estimated cost of the federal government to distribute the prebate checks? And a follow-up question to that was also written in. And I had said earlier, to my understanding, it was going to be direct deposited. Do we know how that money will come in? Will it come in the form of a check or a direct deposit through a bank account?
You know, the government today is pretty much getting rid of any checks just because of the problems that we have with those being able to be taken out of mailboxes and whatnot, plus it's a lot more costly. Direct deposit in the form of going direct to your bank account, a lot of people don't like to have somebody messing with their bank account. So more than likely what you're going to see is what you have today in the form of the EBT card, which we issue to individuals now that are, for example, in receipt of social services or social welfare payments. They have an EBT card. You'll have the same sort of thing, I would think, when we have the FairTax implemented. You'll have that card every month. It will be loaded with the appropriate amount of money based on what you have voluntarily and annually registered with your state administering authority as your number of qualifying family members. So I would expect it to come through an EBT card more than likely, Mark.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks. All right, we got a couple more questions here, and then we'll hit our prebate discussion, which is going to be super brief because it's very simple. And this is a question on the prebate, question from Richard, who asks, regarding the prebate, how will marital status and number of persons in a family household be determined? It seems like this could be vulnerable to corruption. Kerry?
Well, the way that's going to be determined is that it will probably occur around the 1st of October of each year. You'll likely get a card in the mail that you will have to fill out or send in, or whatever process that your state administering authority determines is the best way for them to do it. But you're going to have to put your name, that of the qualifying family members. Now, if you've got a son that's in jail, he's disqualified. And if you've got a son that's already been made independent, he's living outside the home, he's getting more than 50% of his cost or his living from outside the home. A child still in college would probably still qualify, of course, as being a part of a qualifying or as being a qualifying family member. But you're going to have to provide the names, and you're going to have to provide the Social Security number for each member of the family. And, of course, those Social Security numbers can be tracked down to verify that they are, in fact, current, that they're likely with the family that's requesting that. So there's going to be ways through the use of the Social Security card in the future that we'll be able to make sure that that is not in any way being corrupted. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to be perfect because we see today how those things are misused, but certainly it's going to be a means of being able to make sure that whoever's receiving the money and how much they're receiving is based on the number of qualifying individuals in the family and also on that Social Security card or that Social Security number.
Got it. Great comment, and then we'll do our special topic really quickly. That's it for this round of questions, Carrie. Thank you so much. A great comment from Michael, who says, as a business owner, I will not raise my prices because I understand the fair tax. I will gain market share over those businesses in my industry that do raise their prices. I may even lower my prices in an attempt to gain more great market share. I will not be the only business acting this way. Really appreciate that comment, and that's one of the things that we've talked about in the past is we believe that prices will increase not because prices will increase because of the fair tax that's getting added in. To what degree is going to depend on the industry and the business, as we talked about. But certainly we see whoever does decide to raise their prices, they are going to have to come back down because certainly evolved intellectuals like Michael in this case will keep their prices low as a way to win market share, and it'll drive prices back down to pre-fair tax levels over time. So thank you for that comment, Michael. All right, so let's talk prebate here for just a second. And let me get my screen back up here going. So a couple of things, and again, this is a very simple topic, and I've mentioned some of this already, but in reading through the fair tax legislation and the history behind it, when the creators wrote that legislation, the importance of the prebate is to ensure that number one, untax poverty level spending. So that was a really important clause that they wanted to write in, and that's that whole idea of fairness, right? So relieve the tax burden to lower income earners. And what's neat about this, though, is why it's so fair is it's not just helpful to lower income class Americans. The prebate is applicable to all Americans, to every qualifying household with a valid Social Security number. So the prebate relieves the tax burden on poverty level limit spending. And this is important not just to understand on a macro level in terms of being fair. It's important to understand that as the fair tax makes greater strides into the political depths, you'll see politicians who feel threatened by the fair tax will say things like the fair tax, actually what they'll say is, well, my opponent who's in support of the fair tax, they want to raise taxes by 23%. Of course, they fail to mention that all corporate and personal income taxes go away, and Social Security and Medicare taxes go away, and that their income is going to go up by at least 29%. And then they'll also go on to say that it hurts lower income class Americans, and that's just a scare tactic. So this is a really important point to understand it from both from a political perspective as well as a fairness perspective. Okay, so the second point is exempting basic necessities such as food, housing, and clothing, transportation would give a disproportionate tax advantages to the wealthy. Why? Because they spend more in these areas. They buy a lot bigger houses. They spend a lot more money on brand new clothes. They spend a lot more money on multiple vehicles. And they go out to eat a lot more. So if we simply exempted all this, we would give a disproportionate regressive tax, if you will, or a disproportionate tax advantage to the wealthy, and it would be regressive in that sense. So by putting it all in, then nobody gets any advantages. And the other thing is, again, going back to the political side of things, the moment you exempt an industry, you have other industry lobbyists coming out of the woodwork lobbying and saying that they should be exempt. And you get the same lobbyist can of worms that you have in Washington right now that ends up running our politicians. So one of the great things, one of the great byproducts of the fair tax is it really transfers a lot of power away from lobbyists and puts it back into the hands of the people, which is what it should do, which is what what it should do in the first place, right? So that's another really important component of or byproduct of the prebate. And again, you can look at that at both sides in terms of fairness as well as politically. And the third point is simply that the refund, and which is the point I just wanted to make that I think I mentioned earlier, is it happens in advance. So again, fairness. So it would be stressful for lower income class Americans to have this refund, have to wait for this from a cash flow standpoint at the end of the month when they're spending their money on goods and services on the basic necessities of life, and wait for it at the end of the month. It comes in advance, right? So in terms of the prebate, these are three key points that are really valuable to understand, and it's just a greater explanation of this really important and valuable component to the legislation. All right, so let's see if we have any additional questions here, and if we do, we'll get them answered, and if we don't, we will send you on your way. So give me a second here, and let me pull this up. As I do that, I'll just ask my colleague Kerry if he has any other points that he might want to mention about the importance and the value of the prebate component of the legislation. Kerry, anything on that?
Mark, I guess you covered everything pretty thoroughly. I thought there was a good presentation. The big thing is the prebate is just a part of the whole mechanism of the fair tax. Everyone's charged the same rate. Everyone gets the same prebate/rebate as it's addressed in the bill itself, and everyone gets the same advantages from those few credits and very few exemptions that are allowed for businesses out there, primarily in order to eliminate any taxes that they may have paid that will come out of the price of goods and services that they in turn sell to consumers. So the prebate is just another one of those very important mechanisms, and I think you did a good job of covering it. And it certainly does a very good job, I think, too, and thinking about another context is the ideology that at least half the people in this nation have, if not more, that we should not be taxed on those basic necessities of life, and the prebate provides that one mechanism that keeps from getting into the big mess that we have today of what's deductible, what's exemptable, and that sort of thing. And this just resolves it for everyone. Everyone receives the same advantage, if you will, from it.
Yeah, perfect. All right, Kerry, thank you very much. All right, well, we must have done a good job because we don't have any additional questions, but I do want to bring up another slide here, and before everybody goes, before we part ways tonight, there's some great resources out there. Here are some great websites for you to go to. Fairtax.org is the main website for Americans for Fair Taxation, the main organization responsible for writing the fair tax legislation and supporting it. Then you got Florida Fair Tax, flfairtax.com. It's another wealth of information. Fairtaxnation.com is a social networking site, and that's great to get some real-time updated questions answered and what's happening fair tax. Popbox is a wonderful website that allows you to understand what legislation currently exists in Congress and whether or not you support it, and you can vote for it. And you can weigh in on your opinion there. And the fair tax legislation is in there. You can search for it. It's very easy to do. So go to popbox.org and certainly support the fair tax. The last thing is, again, there's some brand new people on the line tonight, and we're so glad that you're here and you're getting educated. And what we want to say to you is, if what you've heard tonight inspires you, and you believe that the fair tax is a much better taxation system for this country and is going to benefit you and this country as a whole, don't just sit on that knowledge. Tell people about it. Tell people that you know. engage conversation. It's such an amazing, wonderful conversation starter. Like, it really is. Like, hey, I just tuned into this webinar the other night. Have you ever heard of the FairTax? And you'll be amazed at what you hear. And when I do that, I do it all the time, and what I hear are people who say, no, I've never heard of that. What's that about? And I get into discussion, and what I realize is people do really care. They just don't know. They just don't think that there's anything out there that's better than the tax system that we have now. And then the other thing that I hear is, oh, yeah, I know about that. Isn't that flat tax where 15% across the board or something like that? And so I get to correct people's misinformation, right? So engage in conversation, number one. Number two, communicate with your elected officials. You can go to fairtax.org to do that. Find out who your federal senators are and your district, your congresswoman or man is, and let them know that you support the fair tax and that they're only going to get your vote in the next election if they become a co-sponsor. And don't just do that once. Do it over and over and over again. And then if you go to fairtax.org, you can go to grassroots, find a local group, support them. In Central Florida here, we've got a great supporting cast. When there's a lot of public events, fairs and such like that, we get out. We have a booth. We educate people. We hand out literature. So give your time, give your money, and that's what it's going to take for this fair tax legislation to keep moving forward. A grassroots effort that impacts our elected officials in a way that really lets them know we're not voting them back in unless they co-sponsor this. All right, so get involved, take action, engage conversation, come back to next month's webinar, bring a friend. And I want to thank my colleague and friend, Carrie Bowers, for always being a great wealth of knowledge. I want to thank you all for being here tonight and taking time out of your schedule to get educated and support us. And we wish you all a great evening, a great rest of your April, and we'll see you all back here in the month of May. Have a great night, everyone.